I've got Theo again,
Hello.
and I don't want to talk to you about Ukraine today. I want to talk to you about policing because you
Hmm.
are an ex-police officer. You know about policing, and I'd like to talk to you about Panorama.
Yes, the documentary.
You,
I
you
watched
saw you
that.
saw it. Yes, I'm afraid I
Yes, I
fell
did.
asleep, but I did try to look at it. And the fellow with the black curly hair, Rory
Yes,
Bibb,
Rory
who
Bibb,
went
who went
undercover. But he
undercover as
wasn't a
a
prop. He didn't go undercover as a proper police officer. He went
no, no,
undercover
no.
as a tell us because I don't understand all this.
So he went undercover as a DDO or dedicated detention officer, and their job is to basically act as jailers. So
Right.
they do the busy work in custody suites, which is where you'll be taken if you're arrested, with cells and such. Bringing people food, occasionally booking people in, managing it, and ensuring. The idea is to ensure that the detainees are safe and
Hmm.
will be unharmed, and they're managed by police sergeants. These are jobs that used to be done by police eons ago, but it's cheaper to hire civilian staff, basically, than
Right. But
warranted
the
officers.
but the prisoners don't realize that they're civilian staff. These people look like police, don't they?
Or they're dressed in a different color uniform and they don't have police officer written on their badge. They'll have designated detention officer
I
bib
see.
in this guy's case.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're,
So
they're
what was
civilians
your
with additional
response?
sort of powers.
Because
What
what
was my
Bibb
response?
has has revealed is a culture of rather alarming abuse going on, certainly verbal abuse going on in the police force, and contempt for whole swathes of our society.
Yeah, he encountered at least one pretty racist officer who's almost certainly out of a job now.
Hmm.
Um, I forget if it was, no, I think it might be two in his time there. And there was one scene which could not have been better shot of the officer, uh, PC Nielsen, and um, the BBC journalist in a pub, and Nielsen starts saying some fairly unpleasant things, and behind him is an enormous neon sign saying "bad decisions," um, which I think could not have been better framed. But
Mm.
it's and yeah, you had a Sergeant McIlvenney, who said some pretty sexist things, and the female. And what was really telling for me was that the female DDOs seemed to basically say he had it coming. And one, he asked one to do a character reference, and the female DDO is filmed saying, "Oh, I can't do a character reference for him," which is that is very telling. So
Yes.
I find it concerning, and um,
But in your experience, this would be unusual, wouldn't it?
yes, yes,
Because
in my experience, yes,
yeah,
but
I've had limited interface with police, but the people I have dealt with, I've admired.
well, things that are
Um,
not unusual,
and,
gallows
and and
humor.
there was have you come across the Alex Belfield story and this incredibly dedicated police officer, Janet Percival?
I haven't looked into it in detail, but I want to talk a bit about the
Yeah, Tommy.
some of the things that were filmed, and that were caught by this by the BBC reporter, Mr. Bibb, and some of the ways people deal with life in the police is gallows humor, and
Yeah.
that is not what a lot of what we saw went beyond that. And I think if a lot of people, average members of the public, saw what policing is, they would probably be shocked because sometimes it is violent. You are occasionally dealing with violent people, and violence is required.
Mhm.
There's a scene where an officer punches somebody, an officer delivers a kick. All of these, if they can be justified, are okay to do under the right circumstances. And we were told, you're told in training, if you can justify it, then you can do it. The police can shoot a person if the situation requires it. Now, the question is, does the situation require it? And what was really the one of the things, other than the views that were put forward by some of these officers, was one officer describing how he used to be a physical therapist, so he knew the pressure points which would hurt the most, and he would apply them when there may not be a need to. If you're restraining
Mm.
somebody, if they're restrained and if they are not struggling. I remember one time I was doing the job that is described, called a constant watch. And the man we were watching tried to headbutt the wall of the cell. It's concrete, so we had to stop him from doing that. And we took him to the ground, we restrained him, we put him in leg restraints, and then we sat him up. And I ended up having a conversation with the guy for a long while until he calmed down. And once he calmed down, he said, "Can the leg restraints come off?" And I said, "Yes." At this point, yeah. But at 2 hours before then, absolutely not, because he was trying to hurt himself, he was trying to hurt officers, and he had to be restrained. But you use the force that is appropriate. You don't go beyond that. And you can hurt people. There is something called pain and compliance, where
Mm.
you you use pain to enable compliance, but that only goes so far as you get the compliance. So you can apply a pressure point if needed. To say somebody is holding their arm and you can't get them in cuffs, you could put a pressure point on their shoulder or on their arm and get them to move. If you can justify it, that's fine. However, the views that some of the officers put forward were very worrying. Well, what I would say is that the police are reflective of the society that they police.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I wonder if similar cameras were put into a city office, were put into the BBC, were
Mm.
put into um,
Would you hear
any
something similar?
other, I think you absolutely would. Now, we expect our police to be better,
Yeah.
rightly. However, the working environments and things like the pay simply mean that the best candidates don't come forward. The police can't recruit at the moment, and they certainly can't recruit the level of people they want to. They raise the bar by demanding things like police officers need degrees, completely pointless, but they don't improve working conditions, they don't improve pay. And police have pretty atrocious working conditions. So, unfortunately, sometimes you just get bad candidates, and the pressure and the environment that they're working in leads to anger and frustration. And if they're the wrong type of person, that's going to roll into illegality, which is
Mm.
some of what we saw. And those officers need to be dealt with. But I remember reading the Casey report when I was still an officer, and I had a commander come over to me. He was doing the rounds, trying to show that they were listening. And what stuck out to me in the Casey report was the group in the police that was mentioned and that was really singled out was senior leadership. And senior leadership has not changed. Mark Rowley was head of Firearms Command during the period in which it was at its most problematic. Sorry, Sir Mark Rowley. And now he's the commissioner. So
What,
if you
what,
don't
what,
change the bosses, how are you really meant to
yeah.
change the culture? And now they've changed how vetting works, and vetting is very problematic in its own way because it's not done by the police. It's outsourced to another to a private organization, as everything seems to be in this country. And if you fail, I had a colleague who failed vetting. They never told her why. They never
Yeah.
told her what the issue was. She appealed and it passed. So there's absolutely no rhyme or reason why they could one day say, "Oh, you've come up for your 10-year vetting and you failed." And you say, "Oh, why? Well, what is it? Perhaps it's a misunderstanding I can address." "Oh, no, we don't have to tell you what it is." "Or can I
Yes,
appeal?" "Oh,
there's
I don't know."
madness there.
So it's, and now you have a culture within the police which is getting to be more about covering your ass than doing the
Yes.
job. And I mean, there's a reason for that. Police do need a very strong internal standard, and it's not being met. And I think, really, I think the police needs ground up level reform. And we're not going to get that, certainly under this government, and certainly not under this police senior leadership team, because, well, it's their empire we would be trying to reform and dismantle. So it's not going to work. So what we saw were symptoms of a deeply broken police service, which is failing. And now the government is adding more things to the pile by saying,
Hmm.
through this alteration in protest law, another thing that police have to deal with, another thing that police have to deal with. And eventually, when are police going to be able to deal with crime if they're constantly having to deal with regulations on protest, with regulations to a certain extent on speech online? It's getting
Well,
to a point where I used to feel quite lucky if I dealt with an actual crime once in a while. It's, oh, this
yes.
is a criminal offence. Good. This isn't a safeguarding matter. This isn't something that social services should be dealing with. Of the amount of times that social services passed the buck. There used to be a phenomena. You'd always be able to tell. In the afternoon on a Friday, we'd get a string of calls from social services. The reason being, obviously, something they haven't been able to do during the week, but they're off on the weekend, but they need it done. So they'll call the police. And the police, well, they can't say no because the buck stops there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's uh, yeah, it's very frustrating, even from the
It's
outside.
it seems to me that the issues raised by the Panorama program have been met by a distraction technique of talking about the Masons, and the police may have
About the
to then
Masons.
indicate whether they are rolling up their trouser
Talk,
legs.
talking about the funny handshake club.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was
I mean that's a waste of time.
I've been asked so often if I was on the square. I've become rather blasé about it. The last time someone asked me, "Are you on the square?" I said, "No, I was on the circle," which I thought was a good enough answer.
I mean that it's kind of ridiculous. We're going to make sure that whether or not they're a Mason is okay. What other societies are they in? And it's a waste of time, and it's a
Yeah.
waste of additional resources, and add it to the enormous list of police officers of workload, most chunk of which is a waste of time.
Yep.
The Malicious Communications Act, when you go into a safeguarding team dealing with domestic violence, you think you're going to be dealing with domestic violence. And the amount of times you deal with unpleasant posts that somebody has done on Facebook to their ex-partner is ridiculous. I know if it crosses the line into harassment, well, then you have something to deal with. But each of those cases requires the same amount of paperwork
Yes.
in terms of safeguarding paperwork than an assault, which is something you really want to get your teeth into. So you end up stuck with, I heard of one person on the borough I used to work in, 37 investigations, one officer, 37, each of those requiring the same level of work. And that's a domestic violence team. The highest I ever got to was 22, and I was quite glad that it didn't get higher. And that's everything from a very, very serious assault to serious stalking to somebody called me an unpleasant name on Facebook.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
have to prioritize that. Now, if the unpleasant names on Facebook were to, well, that's no longer an offense anymore, then I could really focus on the assaults or the stalkings, which you really have to.
Yeah.
So it is it's there the police are being screwed from so many different angles, from idiot police officers who shouldn't be police officers to poor senior leadership, to politicians, and frankly to wider society, because society get the police they deserve. Police is a mirror, and it's failing because we as a society have let it start to fail because we have assigned the backstop for all of society's social ills onto the police.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when I was in Greece, I was quite close to the police, and I used to teach the top police English. And I did it by reading James Bond books. And I remember the head of narcotics and the head of murder getting into a quarrel over who would play the part of Miss Moneypenny. Um, and I taught them very useful phrase like, uh, that is a very small gun, which are very useful, very useful. But
Yeah.
I was there at a time when the police force in Greece was changing from something that had been appalling to something that was becoming respectable and accountable. And it was fascinating to see that process. It wasn't
Yeah.
complete by any means,
British
but it was,
British British police
yeah,
used to be the envy of the world for the society that we lived in. The British Bobby used to be present,
mm,
approachable, and firm when needed, and empathetic. And now it's very difficult to even be that person.
yes,
And because there's just so much, and there are
yeah,
so few. London has 8 to 9 million people, I think, and 30,000 police officers. That's not a fantastic ratio. The neighborhood police officers, the ones who just walk up and down your local area and deal with local issues, they have gone from two per ward to one covering multiple wards.
yes,
So how are you meant to even see a police officer present when they're having to cover all these different areas? And not only that, but they get taken away to deal with protests, to deal with football matches, to deal with concerts, everything.
yeah.
And they take oh, it's I could really go on. But these people like people like McIlvenney comes from another time and time for him to go. And the officers who displayed these views, who admitted to assaults, well, they have to go.
Mhm.
And you just there is no room for that kind of thing. To be a police officer, this is something I ask. Well, could you make a paedophile a cup of tea? If
Mm,
you couldn't, well, then you're not suitable to be a police officer. If you could, and I have, because he's in custody, no matter what he's done, he's my responsibility. And I'm going to get him that. And for a start, it helps me because what's the point in fighting the guy or being abusive?
yeah,
Because I may have to interview him later, and perhaps I want him to see me as a friendlier face, despite what he's done, despite the fact he's a vile human being. Can you make a paedophile a cup of tea? Can you sit down opposite somebody who has done something utterly vile, or somebody you hate in your gut, and put all of that away and take all of that out of you and
no,
just be an investigator and just get to what the truth may be? If you can't, you're not suitable to be a police officer. And it's
mm,
clear to me that some of those guys there in there were no longer suitable. They may have at one point been suitable, but applying pressure points to hurt people just because you can, no, that's not
yeah. There's
acceptable.
a story this morning with Ben Gavir taunting the activists in Israel.
Mm.
And it just strikes me that's such an abuse of power. And it's the same sort of mechanism.
It is, and you have to be very careful because I was always in mind that when I was a police officer, had the power to put somebody in a concrete cage
Mhm.
on suspicion. That suspicion is a very low bar, a very low bar indeed. And it's a very significant responsibility. And you have the power to remove somebody's liberty, even for a short amount of time. That's very significant. And I think the police, the way it's structured today, they are focusing so much on the wrong things, and those directives are coming down from government
But part of
and
the problem there
poor
is the
senior
Home
leadership.
Office is, sorry,
Well, yeah, and I mean the Home Office has always been a problem for policing.
but it has got much worse. I think probably not
Yeah.
so much. You're younger than I am, so. But I can remember when the Home Office was a respectable ministry, and
Mm.
certainly since I think probably Jack Straw, uh, certainly certainly the end of the last Labour government into the Conservative governments, the Home
Yeah,
Office has
I mean,
been
everybody remembers
dreadful.
Theresa May's "do more with less" speech to the Police Federation, um,
Yes,
and it turns out that you can't do more with less
no,
when it comes to policing because people's lives are at stake. If you
sure.
screw up an investigation, if you screw up a domestic violence investigation, if you don't do it properly, people can die.
Mhm.
You can wake up and you receive a phone call saying, "Oh, the complainant on that report has been murdered by the suspect because and that suspect had been bailed by you the week before. You're going to need to come in and give a statement." That's the kind of stakes that are often to be dealt with, and the majority of the people dealing with that are in their early 20s and in their first couple of years of policing.
Mhm.
And not only do they have to deal with that, they have to deal with, I mean, if they're on this ridiculous degree scheme, they have to deal with writing degree essays. So writing their 3,000 word essays a semester. And they have to do just with learning to be a police officer because the College of Policing has pulled this out of a hat and said, oh, we need every police officer to have a degree. So there's just so much getting constantly hammered. And why would you want to stay and do that?
I agree.
So we don't
We
have
have to
enough
change it.
police.
We have to
We
change
do.
it.
We do. And we have to be, I think we have to be certainly much more rigorous in recruitment. And we actually have to couple that with offering a package that people want to sign up to. Because right now, you can't really live as a probationary police officer in London.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult on the pay scale that you're at. You can, once you get maybe 7 years in, 6 years in, then the pay starts getting reasonable. But for those first few years, it's a struggle. I mean, I remember wondering how I was going to make it through to the end of the month and do my grocery shopping because I just didn't have enough
Well,
cash.
the same is true of teaching.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
except
absurd. And one of the things you had as a teacher or a policeman in the past was community respect, which buoyed you up. And now you don't have that
no, um, we've we've
in
certainly
both
lost that.
jobs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that comes down to an enormous number of issues which has changed over time, and our country no longer has that. And I mean, but to an extent, police have lost that respect on their own. And
Mm.
I often used to say, oh, we are still coughing from the cold that police officers in the 70s and 80s gave us. And
Yes.
that's still very much
This
the case.
the Sweeney as opposed to
Yeah.
Dixon of Dock Green.
Yeah. And I get frustrated just thinking about it. I I think we really need ground up reform and we need we do need to do what Sir Mark Rowley is talking about and weed out every bad egg. But we also need to do that without creating a culture of fear within the police, which is the last thing you want.
Hmm.
You need to be able to trust your colleagues. And we also need to do that while increasing recruitment numbers. Oh, how on earth do we do all of that with the budget that we currently have? And the fact that they're closing front offices across the Met. I mean, the one I used to work at, Bethnal
Yep.
Green, that front office was full regularly.
Yes,
One
yes.
time I took serious sexual assault reports in that front office. I took a report from a man who'd been kidnapped and seriously hurt. He had boiling water poured over him. Um, People don't just come into a front office for willy-nilly things. People come in to report some really serious things, and sometimes it's vulnerable people who don't know how to fill out a form online
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
who are worried about calling.
Yeah.
And closing them is just closing another face to the community. And I can understand why they're doing it because they haven't got the scratch. And I can understand why there's not going to be ground up policing reform in this country because they haven't got the scratch.
Hmm.
So we're asking the police and to do now the Home Office is asking them to do more. So, oh, has this protest happened before in this area on this same issue? Or somebody's got to check that. And then, okay, what are you going to do? Clear them? Are you going to clear the streets? Are we going to get TSG, dogs and horses out to clear a peaceful protest? That doesn't sound very British to me. It sounds
Yeah.
like and it sounds like an enormous waste of police resources. Those dogs could be out searching for missing people. That TSG could be out on a football match, ensuring that everybody is safe, and the horses could be out doing the same. But no, they're dealing with a peaceful protest because it's happened in the same time and place before, the same issue. No, no, that's just another load on the enormous amount of weights on the chest that is modern policing.
Yes.
And it's utterly farcical. And unfortunately, senior leadership has, I mean, they can't say no because it's the Home Office, but they are not helping the average officer. And the officers and in Panorama program, those that are going to be fired should be fired. Some of the things that I saw, I thought, well, that's dealing with a violent detainee. Sometimes you do have to punch somebody. That's just how the world works. And sometimes policing, if people were to see it without an understanding, is utterly it's brutal sometimes.
Yeah.
But when you're dealing with somebody, I mean, one of the cases I had was a woman who was naked in the street, running away from a man who'd abducted and abused her. Um, this is the kind of level of violence, of brutality that exists within every society behind closed doors. And sometimes that violence and brutality needs to be met by violence and brutality, but it needs to be met by violence with a cool head and with one reason. And once it's no longer required, it stops. Because if you start to revel in it, as some of these officers did, then you are entering abuse of power and sadism. And that is unacceptable. Like I said earlier, you need to be the kind of person that can put your personal feelings completely away. You need to be devoid of feeling to a certain extent. And yeah, make a
Yeah.
paedophile a cup of tea. And in the same day, perhaps speak to the victim, or not the same day, because then you get forensic cross contamination, but in a different day, speak to a victim of the same offence
Yes.
and show the empathy that they need, which Sergeant McAvenny at one point appeared not to, although investigations do have things can go either way. So I
Yeah.
know I as for the documentary, certainly pretty well done. Although it is telling that he spent 12 months in the police and came out with three or four where he would have dealt with hundreds of different officers over
Yes.
that period filming. And
Yes.
again, what kind of footage would one get if it was a banking office in the city, or a law firm, or the BBC itself, or government offices? I imagine some of it would be quite similar
So
because
in the
policing
end,
is a mirror.
yeah. So in the end, we could take a fairly optimistic view of it. It's not as bad as it could have been.
I mean, yeah, it could always be worse. Certainly, that's a mantra that I that I stick to. It can always get worse, um, but it's not good. The
No.
officers who who said those things or who admitted to doing those things, yeah, they should be disciplined and if needs be fired. But policing is so under pressure at the moment from all angles. And we need to relieve that pressure a bit if we want an effective police force, because we don't really have one at the moment.
It was a very brave thing for Rory Bibb to do, though.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't become a DDO for love nor money. I'd hate that job. You don't see the sun for 12 hours a day
Yeah.
in a literal dungeon. No, I like to see the outside world occasionally, and it is, yeah, it is. It's good that the BBC can do that kind of thing, and I'd like them to do some more. I'd like them to do more about the work cultures in other places as well,
Hmm.
because
Absolutely.
and I'd like some real conversations about solutions to policing in this country, because they're asked to do too much with too little, and too much of what they're asked to do isn't anything to do with crime.
Hmm.
I mean, my last job in the police while I was on the way out was sat behind a spreadsheet
Yes.
dealing with something to do with immigration. It was didn't really feel like crime.
I'm
And
sorry.
no, it's that's kind of the nature of the beast. And until we change that, we're not going to have an effective police service, and we're going to continue to have security guards and Gregs, which I think is if you want a litmus test as the state of our society, I well, the first time I got back from Ukraine, in Kyiv, a city where you can leave your laptop um, on a desk in a cafe, go to the toilet, come back, it'll still be there. Good luck doing that in London. I got out
Yeah.
the train station and there was a security guard in Greg's, and I realized I actually, other than the soldiers, hadn't seen a security guard, especially at a shop in Ukraine. Um,
Hmm.
especially at a baker's.
Yeah.
And that's the current state that we're in. And without serious reform to almost every aspect of our society, policing included, we're not going to change that.
Yes, it's disappointing. We
Yeah,
must
so
stop there.
yes, yes, it's good to speak to you, Tim.
It's good to speak to you too, and thank you for taking the time,
Oh, no
um,
worries.
and for not being too pessimistic about it.
No, I thought I look, it's like I said, policing is a mirror, and the police you have will generally should reflect attitudes within society. And unfortunately, we have some pretty unpleasant attitudes in our society, and those are going to spill over into the police.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
they should be
Right.
better. But if we want them to be better, treat them better.
Thank you. Thank
Thank you.
you. Just before we go, where can people find you?
So I focus my work on the global conflict between democracy and dictatorship. I have a Substack called Dictators v Democrats, where I do my writing, weekly roundups, the YouTube channel of the same name. And I also have a podcast where I interview freedom fighters. Essentially, I interview people involved in struggling for democracy, dissidents, exiles,
Mhm.
and people involved in defending it, academics, journalists. I write very little about policing because I'm kind of done with it.
Yes, but You have a very important insight. You've actually been there, you've done it. So
Hmm.